"So you need to exit the aircraft." The security officer's voice cracked through the crowded cabin, slicing the tense air in half. For a brief moment, everything fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the man sitting calmly in the front rows. No one blinked. No one dared to breathe. Marcus Reed lifted his head. The red light from the emergency panel reflected off his bronzed cheekbones, carving his face into something that looked forged from steel. "No," he said, his voice low-clipped and cold like a blade fresh from the whetstone. That single word was enough to choke the air in the cabin. Behind him, 237 passengers held their breath. A few phones were raised screens glowing in the dim light as lenses began recording, capturing seconds of history none of them yet understood were about to unfold. Lieutenant Ethan Morales, the officer standing in the aisle, tightened his belt. His eyes never left Marcus. The command in his head was clear. Remove the passenger. But something in the man's gaze made him hesitate. Seat 2A stood empty. It made no sense. No one could explain why a fully paid first-class seat remained unoccupied. Yet everyone on board could feel it. The man in row 27 was no ordinary passenger. Marcus didn't move. His hands rested neatly on the armrests, his posture so composed it seemed unreal. The veins in his wrist pulsed steadily, but his eyes held decades of endurance, sharpened pride, born from boardrooms, where he had once been doubted, dismissed, and measured by the color of his skin. From the back of the cabin, a whisper rose. Who does he think he is? That question was like a spark tossed into gasoline. More whispers, more cameras. But Marcus didn't hear them. He didn't need to. He had lived through those words too many times before. 3 hours earlier at JFK Airport, the morning sun poured like molten silver over the glass towers. Marcus Reed, 45 years old, stepped out of a titanium-gray Tesla. His tie was straight, his wrist adorned with an old Omega watch, the only thing he still kept from his late father. Each footstep echoed across the marble floor, steady and deliberate, like the heartbeat of a man who had fought too many battles in the corporate world to count. At 45, Marcus Reed was a symbol of the new generation of leadership, the CEO of NextCore Systems, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire whose innovations powered half of Silicon Valley. They called him the architect of future data. But that morning at the check-in counter, no one saw the architect. They only saw a black man in a tailored suit. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." The young agent Lindsay Parker, 28, greeted him with a polite smile that slowly faded as her eyes landed on the name in his passport. Checking in for flight 447 to San Francisco. Yes, first class. Seat 2A. Lindsay's fingers hesitated over the keyboard, trembling slightly. She threw a quick glance toward her supervisor's desk, then lowered her voice. There seems to be a small issue with your reservation." Marcus looked at her. His expression stayed calm, but a familiar instinct rose inside him. He had seen this before, the cautious glance, the unnecessary typing, the half-smile of someone trying to exclude him while pretending to be polite. "There is no issue," he said slowly. "I booked that seat 4 weeks ago and paid in full. Confirmation code, Reed MR 2A. Supervisor Carol Whitman, blonde hair tied tight, a string of pearls around her neck, approached. Mr. Reed, we're having a bit of a weight distribution challenge today. For safety reasons, we'll need to move your seat to row 27. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Weight distribution, I weigh 85 kilos. And that seat, he pointed at the monitor, is empty. This decision comes from operations, Sir Carroll replied smoothly. Row 27B is a very comfortable aisle seat, conveniently close to the lavatory. We appreciate your cooperation. Just then, a white man in a wrinkled polo shirt walked up. Hi, checking in. I'm on standby for first class. Carol's demeanor changed instantly. Her voice turned sweet as honey. Of course, Mr. Keene, let me check. Oh, you're in luck. We just had a cancellation. Seat 2. A just opened up. Everything froze. Marcus stared at her, his words landing like hammers. That's my seat. Silence. Carol cleared her throat, her composure faltering. Mr. Reed, please stay calm. If you cause a disturbance, I'll have to call security. Do it, Marcus replied, pulling out his phone and turning on the camera. Let's record everything. Carol's fingers shook as she reached for her radio, but she knew the game had changed. The scene was being filmed. Every eye in line was now fixed on them. Marcus took the boarding pass for 27B and spoke quietly, just loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll board the plane. But seat 2A will stay empty, so every passenger can see how Aurora Airways treats black customers, even when that customer could buy the plane outright. And now in the sealed metal cabin, his words had become prophecy. Seat 2. A still empty. A single empty seat carrying the weight of an entire system. Morales stepped forward, his hand brushing Marcus's seatbelt. Sir, please cooperate. Marcus turned his head slowly. Cooperate with what's wrong. You think that's what I should do? Morales froze. In his mind flashed the image of his daughter, the little girl who had laughed with joy last year when she received a scholarship from the Next Core Foundation. The man who had created that foundation was sitting right in front of him. Morales lowered his hand. No one said another word. Only the deep hum of the engines remained, blending with the heavy breaths of 237 souls. One empty seat. One word no. And an entire industry had just ignited the spark of a storm like none it had ever faced. Marcus Reed closed his eyes. He knew that from this moment on it wasn't just seat 2A that would remain vacant. It was the conscience of the world waiting to be awakened. 3 hours before, the word no shook the entire cabin. JFK Airport was drenched in the cold light of a winter morning. The giant glass panels shimmered with silver reflections, mirroring the image of a man walking through the automatic doors with a calm, commanding stride that made others turn to look. Marcus Reed, 45-year-old CEO of Next Core Systems, wasn't the kind of man who needed to project power. He was power itself. His dark grey suit fit perfectly across his shoulders, the white shirt beneath crisp and flawless. Each of his steps struck the marble floor with purpose, in sync with the steady rhythm of the old Omega watch on his wrist, the only keepsake from his late father. He didn't know it yet, but within a few hours that same watch would witness a moment that would redefine an entire industry. The terminal buzzed with passengers queuing at the check-in counters. Behind one of them, a young blonde woman, her face weary from the night shift, typed on her keyboard. The name tag on her chest read, Lindsay Parker. When Marcus placed his ticket on the counter, she gave him a polite, practiced smile, the kind of customer service smile that belonged more to the job than to the person. Good morning, sir. May I have your ID? Her voice was polite, steady, but when her eyes stopped at the surname, Reed, the smile faded just slightly. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but Marcus noticed. He had seen that smile disappear before, at restaurant counters, at hotel receptions, at bank desks. It didn't vanish because of a system error. It vanished because of an assumption. Checking in for Flight 447 first class seat, 2A, he said evenly. Just a second, Lindsay typed her eyes, darting right toward an older woman standing nearby, the supervisor, Carol Whitman. Lindsay's fingers suddenly froze. It seems there's a small issue with your reservation." "What kind of issue?" "Well, sir, the system is showing a seat allocation error." Marcus stayed silent. His deep brown eyes watched carefully. He saw the tremor in her hands, the stiffness in her posture. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was a performance. "There's no error," he said quietly. "I paid 4 weeks ago. Confirmation number DL4472A. Lindsay swallowed hard. "I'll have my supervisor check again." Carol approached her perfume, strong, her confidence even stronger, the kind of woman accustomed to looking down at others. "Mr. Reed," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we're experiencing a minor issue with weight distribution on this morning's flight. For safety reasons, we'll need to move you to row 27. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Weight distribution?" "Yes, purely a technical requirement," she replied smoothly. "And who makes that decision? The operations department." Marcus looked straight into her eyes. "Seat 2. A is empty, isn't it?" "It is, but..." "Then I'll take the seat I purchased." The air seemed to freeze. People nearby began to take notice. A few paused mid-step, their suitcases still in hand. A security guard glanced over alert. Carol tried to maintain her composure. "Mr. Reed, we're simply following procedure. Your new seat, 27B, is an aisle seat, very comfortable. 27B is next to the lavatory, but it meets safety standards." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "And what safety standard makes seat 2A unsafe for me?" Carol didn't answer. Just then, a white man in a wrinkled shirt walked up, wearing the easy smile of someone who believes the world always makes room for him. "Hi, checking in. I'm on standby for first class." Carol's demeanor changed instantly, as if flipping a switch. "Of course, Mr. Keene. Let me check for you." Her fingers danced quickly across the keyboard this time, genuinely typing. A few seconds later, her face brightened with delight. "Wonderful news. A first-class seat just opened up too." The words hit the air like a stone dropped in a glass room. Marcus stood still. Around him, the crowd shifted, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. His voice broke through the silence, every word sharp as a hammer strike. "That is my seat." Carol froze. Lindsay lowered her head. Thomas Keene hesitated, stepping back awkwardly. "So please don't cause a disturbance," Carol hissed through her teeth. "If you continue, I'll have to call security." Marcus pulled out his phone. "Call them," he said. The camera light flicked on. "And while we wait, let's record exactly how you handle your so-called weight distribution." Lindsay swallowed hard. Carol tried to stay composed, but the hand holding her radio trembled. "John, security, please. Come to counter B12. The passengers behind began whispering. A middle-aged woman shook her head. "Unbelievable, this still happens." A young man lifted his phone. "We're recording this." Marcus's voice stayed calm, but inside him anger rose like a tide. Not because of the seat. Not even because of the insult. But because it was happening again. 30 years ago, his father, Professor William Reed, had been escorted out of a first-class cabin under the excuse of a faulty seatbelt. Marcus had watched him bow his head quietly and walk away to avoid trouble. Today he would not bow his head. "All right," Marcus said, finally, his tone low and steady. "I'll take seat 27B, but seat 2A will remain empty. Every passenger will see it, and they'll know what Aurora Airways thinks of its customers, of people who could buy this entire airline, yet are still treated like outsiders. Carol's face drained of color. "That's your choice." "No," Marcus replied. "It's yours." He turned and walked away, each step deliberate, each movement etching an unspoken declaration into the floor beneath him. "No one decides the value of my dignity." As he left the counter, light from the glass wall glinted off the boarding pass in his hand. 27B. On his phone, he typed a short message to his assistant Alana. "Call the board. Activate Protocol 7. Behind him, Carol's pulse quickened. She didn't know what Protocol 7 meant, but a chill ran down her spine, a warning that she had just unleashed a storm. Lindsay lowered her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. On her screen, the word still blinked in defiance. "Passenger read Marcus. Seat 2A. Confirmed." She knew it wasn't a system error. It was human error. She shut down the computer and looked toward the window, where the morning light cast pale reflections across the floor. Like a silent question, sometimes, a single moment of silence at a check-in counter can ignite a revolution. The wheels clattered along the jet bridge's iron floor like the drumbeat of a trial. Yet to begin, passengers filed onto Aurora Airways, Flight 447, and though no one spoke aloud, eyes kept sneaking toward the middle-aged man in a grey suit at the very back of the line, the one who had just turned the morning check-in counter into the center of the internet. Marcus Reed looked at a no-1, calm ticket marked 27B in hand, stepping through the connector, one rung at a time, feeling the steel cold air pouring from the idling engines outside. Beyond the glass, the sun had not fully risen, just bright enough to bounce off the window and glance across, seat 2A first class empty. One empty seat carrying the weight of an entire history. Marcus entered the economy cabin, and heads lifted. A few passengers recognized him, the face that had appeared on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Quiet Billionaire Behind Neck's Core." A college kid whispered, "Oh my God, that's Marcus Reed. Why is he sitting here?" An elderly woman in row 12 turned to look her gaze, half surprise and half shame, on behalf of the world. As Marcus bent to stow his bag, a girl of about 8 tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mum, why is that man sitting here if his seat is up there?" The mother froze, then bowed her head and murmured as if to herself, "Because sometimes people forget what's right." That answer, accidentally recorded and streamed by a nearby passenger, spread across social media within minutes under the hashtag EmptySeat2A. Lead flight attendant Melanie Ford, 33 years old, approached with a strained smile. "Mr. Reed, can I help you with your seat assignment?" Marcus met her eyes. "No, you don't need to help. Just ask your supervisor how the weight distribution is working today." Melanie faltered, glancing toward first class. "But 2A is empty." "Exactly," Marcus said, voice cool. The air in the cabin grew so dense you could cut it with a knife. In the row ahead, a man in a University of Berkeley hoodie, Jordan Lee, 20 years old, raised his phone to live stream. "You're watching this live. This man, Marcus Reed, CEO of NextCore, has been pushed out of his own first-class seat by Aurora. And guess what? That seat is still empty." Thousands began watching the counter, ticked upward with every second. 3,000, 12,000, 20,000 viewers. At the front, supervisor Carol Whitman finished the prepare for takeoff announcement, then realized every gaze had drifted to seat 2A, empty, silent, and speaking volumes with its emptiness. She forced a smile, her voice shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stow your devices as we prepare for departure." Before anyone could react, a woman's voice rose from mid-cabin, strong and clear. "We're not going anywhere until you explain this." Everyone turned. It was Dr. Naomi Ellis, 36 years old, wearing a white coat with a hospital badge still at her neck. "I'm a physician, and I flew first class yesterday, and that man she pointed to, Marcus, paid for his seat." "Why is he sitting here, Mom? Please sit down," Carol snapped. Naomi stepped forward. "No, I want a reason." Loud and clear, another passenger, a brown-skinned man in row 5, stood. "She's right. This is discrimination." A third voice, a middle-aged woman clutching her son's hand. "Shame on you." The noise rippled through the cabin. Carol keyed her radio security to aircraft code. "Yellow." From the rear, a passenger tossed out a bitter jab. Maybe make it code black, since that's the real problem here. Laughter sharp and sour flashed and died as 2 security officers entered. Lieutenant Ethan Morales and Officer Davis moved to mid-cabin faces, taut. Morales scanned the aisle and saw dozens of phones aimed his way. "Sir," he said softly, fighting to keep his tone neutral, "we need to resolve this peacefully." Marcus lifted his head. "Great. Then let's resolve it with logic. I sit in the seat I purchased, or this plane doesn't fly." "Mr. Reed, that's not your decision to make, isn't it?" He cut in. The question struck like a hammer on the door of counterfeit authority. Morales hesitated. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. 18 years old, newly awarded a full scholarship from the Next Core Foundation. Her eyes bright when she said, "I won't let anyone look down on me because of my skin." He drew a long breath. He no longer knew whether he was enforcing an order or defending justice. In row 12, the elderly woman whispered a prayer. The 8-year-old lifted her mother's phone, filming as the cabin began to rise to its feet. One by one. No planning, no slogans, just instinct pulling them to stand with Marcus. "You'll have to get through us first," Dr. Naomi said. And through us, Jordan added, holding his phone high. Another voice rose. "We stand with him." No one remained seated. The cabin became a sea of bodies surging. Carol pressed the radio security escalate to code black. Static crackled in the air. This time, Morales did not answer. He looked at Marcus. Their eyes met, quiet understanding without words. Carol stepped back, sweat beading at her hairline. A phone buzzed in her pocket. An internal message from corporate communications, "Empty seat 2." A trending globally. CNN requesting comment. She went rigid. This was no longer a minor incident. It was a brand catastrophe, racing at the speed of light. A passenger up front said, loudly, voice tight with anger, "It's shameful to see this in the year 2025. Another answered, "No, this is the year we stop staying silent." Marcus looked around. He saw faces of every shade, black, white, Asian, brown, standing shoulder to shoulder in a cramped aisle. For the first time, he felt he was not alone. In the service area, Lindsay Parker, the morning check-in agent, watched quietly through the crew window. She saw the aircraft still motionless and knew she had helped bring this moment into being. A hot tear fell across her hand as she read the headline on her phone, "Live Aurora Airways, accused of racial discrimination, Flight 447 on hold." She typed a message to Carol but could not press send. "Stop this before it's too late." In the cabin, Marcus remained still. No shouting, no fury, only a strange and steady calm. "Officer Morales," he said quietly. Yet his voice carried, "You have a daughter, right?" Morales nodded. "If she were turned away for the reason I was today, what would you do?" The air seemed to thicken. Morales bowed his head, unclipped his badge, and set it on an empty seat. "I won't be part of this." Applause burst like a wave. Someone cried. Someone filmed. Morales stepped back, shoulders trembling, but his eyes brighter than ever. Carol retreated her voice. "Catching you can't do this." Marcus faced forward. "You're mistaken," he said, each word heavy as metal. "I am doing exactly this." A long hush fell. Then the cockpit chime sounded. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to have a situation." The voice of Captain Daniel Mercer was measured and firm. "Please remain seated. I'll be addressing this personally." The entire cabin held still. Marcus lifted his gaze, serene. The real battle had only just begun. The cabin sank into silence, not the gentle hush of a red eye, but a taut stillness, like a violin string about to snap. Every head turned toward the cockpit door as it swung open, and a salt-and-pepper-haired man in a pilot's uniform stepped out, 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders. Captain Daniel Mercer, 48 years old, a man who had spent 3 decades in the sky, had never faced a flight like this. He walked the aisle slowly, eyes sweeping across hundreds of faces, and when his gaze settled on Marcus Reed, he gave a slight nod, the kind of nod one gives to a peer, not a passenger. "Mr. Reed," his voice was low and firm, "I'm told there's a problem with your seat." Marcus stood. "It's not about the seat, Captain. It's about dignity." A soft ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Mercer frowned and glanced at Carol Whitman, the supervisor standing rigid by the aisle, with her radio clenched in her hand. "Explain, Carol." Her voice shook. "This was a decision from operations for weight and balance safety reasons. Weight Mercer cut in seat 2. A is empty. If Mr. Reed is not sitting there, is the airplane lighter or heavier?" Carol blanched. "I am following directives from my superior, from Jason Whitaker, the regional manager." The name made Marcus narrow his eyes. He had met Whitaker before, a smooth talker, with the arrogant gaze of a man who believes power is a birthright. Mercer pulled a tablet from his pocket and tapped quickly, the screen's light washing across his face as his expression darkened. "Jason Whitaker." He read aloud the person who sent this morning's internal email about maintaining the brand space of first class. He looked up. "Were you aware of this email?" Carol bowed her head. "I read it, Captain." Murmurs rose across the cabin. Someone repeated the contents from social media because the email had leaked minutes earlier. Staff must ensure a premium experience in first class. Use discretionary authority to seat passengers who align with the brand image. Marcus closed his eyes and drew a steady breath. "So say it plainly," he said quietly, each word crisp. "If my skin does not fit your brand, I am not allowed to sit there." No one answered. The truth answered for them. Morales still stood there, no longer an order-taker, watching the scene like a courtroom in the sky. "Captain," he said, "everyone is filming. The live stream just passed 50,000 viewers. CNN has picked it up." Carol flinched, her face draining. "God," she whispered, "if corporate finds out." Corporate Marcus turned back. "You do not need to call them. They are already watching." He took out his phone, dialed, and switched to speaker. "Patricia, activate Protocol 7. A woman's voice rang out clear over the speaker. "Confirmed, Mr. Reed. Emergency statement dispatched to the Aurora Airways board, to the press, and to all shareholders. Emergency board meeting is being convened." Carol stared. Mercer froze. Passengers began to whisper as they realized the man in row 27 was not just a passenger. Marcus spoke levelly like wind before a storm. "I am Marcus Reed, CEO of NextCore Systems. My company holds 15% of Aurora, and my investment fund holds an additional 12%. We are the second largest shareholder." A wave of chatter swept the cabin. A white man in the forward row blurted, "My God, he could buy this plane." Marcus half smiled. "No need to buy it. I only need them to remember I already paid for seat 2A. Carol's fingers trembled on the radio. Flight operations code black confirmed. We need guidance. The ground channel crackled back. Stand by for senior instruction. Do not depart until cleared. Mercer removed his cap and sighed. Do you understand what this means, Carol? Yes, the flight is delayed. No, he said, looking out where sunlight glittered on the wing. The entire sky just stopped. Passengers began to speak, all at once. Jordan Lee kept streaming anger in his voice. You are witnessing history. An airline chose prejudice over justice, and now a billionaire CEO is forcing them to face themselves. Beside him, Dr. Naomi Ellis gripped his hand. This is no longer about a seat. This is about how long we have stayed silent. An older black man in the back row called out, My son was thrown off a plane for wearing a hoodie. I stayed quiet. No more. Applause started in scattered claps, then swelled the sound of anger, of shame, of hope rising in those who had endured. Marcus sat phone still in his hand, the screen lighting with a notice emergency board meeting in session. He knew the battle had moved beyond his own body, flowing through Wi-Fi signals and blue screens into the hands of millions watching. Mercer stepped to Marcus's side. Mr. Reed, I will file an honest report on what happened. Thank you, Captain. All I require is the truth, nothing more and nothing less. The captain turned to Carol. You will answer to the board when we land. Carol's mouth opened, but no words came. Her phone rang, Jay Whittaker. She fumbled it to her ear. Jason, it is getting worse. He is a major shareholder. The voice on the other end snapped. Keep him quiet. If you must drag him off the aircraft. Carol paled. We cannot. They are live streaming. I do not care. We cannot allow this video to spread. Marcus heard every word. He tapped speaker. Hello, Mr. Whittaker. You are speaking to the man you tried to keep out of first class. The cabin held its breath. Whittaker's tone dropped sour and tight. Mr. Reed, you are overreacting. This is a minor misunderstanding. Misunderstandings do not wipe 8% off your stock in 10 minutes, Whittaker. Marcus ended the call, his eyes sharp as a blade. Now bring the captain back. I have terms. 2 minutes later, Mercer returned. What do you want? Marcus stood his voice, carrying even and strong. 3 things. 1, I take my seat. 2A. 2 Whittaker is summoned before the board the moment we land. 3, the airline executes anti-discrimination training within 30 days. If it fails, I liquidate my entire position, 27%. Mercer exhaled. You are talking billions of dollars. I know, Marcus said calmly, but there is something more expensive than money, silence. The cabin fell utterly still. No one dared to breathe. Marcus turned back to 27B and sat. Outside, the sun had climbed its light, pouring through the window onto seat 2, A still empty, still waiting. He looked at it for a long moment, then murmured, just for himself, Do not worry. I will put you back where you belong. In the cockpit, Mercer lifted the radio. Tower, this is flight 447. Request hold on departure. We have an operational level issue to resolve. 447 copy. Maintain position and wait for instructions. He set the mic down, watched sunlight spill across the flight deck glass, and gave a dry smile. 30 years of flying, and never a day when the sky had to wait for one man. Today it would. No one could pinpoint the exact moment the storm began, perhaps when Captain Daniel Mercer, shut down the engine start sequence, or when hundreds of passengers raised their phones at once, but everyone knew one thing: Flight 447 was not taking off. Across screens worldwide, the headline, "Aurora Airways Faces Discrimination Scandal," mid-flight flashed again and again. Jordan Lee's livestream crossed 100,000 viewers' comments poured like a waterfall. That empty seat is indicting an entire system. This isn't news. This is how history begins. Inside the cabin, warm yellow light glinted across hundreds of waiting faces. Marcus Reed still sat in row, 27B fingers interlaced. He did not need to shout. His power lived in his composure. If other people's anger was fire, his silence was the detonator. Carol Whitman was sweating through her collar. The radio in her hand crackled. "Carol, this is Jason. Headquarters is on fire. The CEO is en route to the boardroom. Keep the aircraft contained. Do not let anyone deplane." "Contained," she whispered, eyes sweeping the aisle. "The whole world is watching. How can anything be contained?" Now the voice on the radio snapped. "Follow orders, or you will be the first to lose your job." Carol let the radio fall to her lap. Hands trembling, 20 years on the job had taught her how to handle difficult customers, how to perform politeness. But she had never stood before this, a naked truth projected onto millions of screens. She looked toward Marcus, torn between calling security and bowing her head in apology. In the cockpit, Mercer called operations directly. "This is Captain Mercer. Flight 447. I have a passenger discriminated against under a regional manager's directive. I want explicit guidance." The reply was dry. "Mercer, follow procedure. Remove the passenger. We cannot delay a flight for one individual." Mercer tightened his grip. "One individual, hundreds are watching, and millions are furious if I comply. You will have more than a delay. You will have a crisis, Captain. You do not have authority to declare a crisis. Then today I will create one." Mercer hung up and rose for the first time in 30 years of flying. He chose not to obey. When the captain appeared mid-cabin, the crowd fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice was iron, steady and low. "I have verified the facts. The decision to reassign Mr. Reed's seat was not based on technical reasons. It was based on subjective judgment. And I will not depart until this is resolved fairly." Cheers broke like surf. An elderly woman in the center row stood and clasped his hand. "Captain, you just made us believe in people again." Carol collapsed into a seat, all her borrowed authority gone. Marcus rose and faced the front. "Thank you, Captain. But fairness is not only me returning to 2A. It is ensuring no one else lives this again." He lifted his phone, dialed, and put the call on speaker. "Patricia, give me the status." A woman's voice rang out. "Sir, the Aurora board is in emergency session. The stock is down 12% in 15 minutes. Every major outlet is running the story. They are waiting for your statement." Marcus allowed a thin smile. "Good, then let me be clear." He stepped into the aisle. Light, his features set. "I require 3 conditions. 1, I take the 2. A seat I purchased, 2. Jason Whittaker is suspended immediately. 3, Aurora Airways launches an anti-discrimination training program within 30 days under independent third-party oversight." Applause swelled. Security Lieutenant Morales stepped forward. "I will confirm those demands in my report." Carol lifted her head, her voice a rasp. "You have no right to coerce us with your shares." Marcus turned. "Not coercion, responsibility. If you do the right thing, you have no reason to fear anyone's stake." Outside the tower called in. "Flight 447 status. We show no taxi," Mercer answered evenly. "Resolving an issue. ethical in nature. At Aurora headquarters, dozens of screens flickered in unison. Shareholders shouted, CEO Elaine Porter, a brown-haired woman in her 50s, strode in pale-faced "Dear God, who allowed this to stream, live." An aide blurted, "The whole world is watching. We cannot cut the feed." Elaine shut her eyes. "Patch me through to the aircraft now." Back in the cabin, Carol's phone rang. "This is CEO Porter." "We are watching. We want to speak to Mr. Reed." Marcus took the handset and toggled speaker. "Ms. Porter, welcome aboard. Flight 447. Can you explain why your airline treats customers according to skin color?" Silence hummed for a few beats. "Mr. Reed, this was an individual's mistake. I apologize." Marcus pressed his lips. "Individual mistakes do not repeat 43 times in 6 months. I have the data, and if you do not change right now, I will liquidate my position entirely." Noise bled from the other end, male voices, arguing chairs, scraping a fist on a table. Elaine spoke quickly. "All right, what do you want?" "Ground the entire flight. Crew network, halt operations until training is complete. You must be joking. That will cost us billions." "It will not," Marcus replied, unruffled. "It is an investment in trust." Elaine panted. "You do not understand. You are wrong. I understand perfectly. I understand what it is to be judged by appearance alone, and I will not let the next generation inherit that world." The cabin went still, 100 pairs of eyes fixed on a man using power not to dominate, but to reset how the world runs. Mercer moved close and murmured, "You know I have flown for 3 decades, and today is the first time I have felt the sky carry weight." Marcus looked out the window. Light washed the silver fuselage. The Aurora logo seemed to tremble in the breeze, he whispered. "And today, it will learn to fly again, on clean wings." Mid-cabin, the student, Jordan, said softly to Naomi Ellis, "He is not only reclaiming seat 2A, he is reclaiming a place for all of us." Naomi smiled through wet eyes. "Yes, and I think he will." Morales sank into the back row, removed his cap and exhaled. He knew he might be disciplined, but he also knew his daughter would be proud when she read the news. In the cockpit, Mercer lifted the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I am placing Flight 447 on a departure hold to ensure justice. Before we take off, hundreds of hands broke into applause, not for a delay, but for faith that one person can force an entire system to stop with 2 words. It is wrong." Marcus looked down at the ticket in his hand. "Wudu?" A blurred in the sunlight, he smiled faintly. "Father, this time I am not walking off the plane." Outside, the noon sun blazed, reflecting across the motionless aircraft, as if the whole world for one suspended second had chosen to stop and listen. The air inside the plane was so thick you could hear other people's hearts beating outside the runway had gone still. Other aircraft sat in line for taxi. Yet Flight 447, a small jet among hundreds of metal giants, had become the epicenter of the world. Passengers' phone screens flickered non-stop as CNN, BBC and Fox News cut in live-breaking Flight 447 of Aurora Airways held at JFK after a racial discrimination incident involving billionaire CEO Marcus Reed. The viewer count on Jordan Lee's livestream surged 250,000, then 480,000, then 700,000 on social media, the hashtag #EmptySeat2. A climbed to number 1 globally in 18 minutes. Carol Whitman hunched behind the mid-cabin service console, fingers crushing her phone, eyes vacant, the radio in her hand. Crackled Carol, "This is headquarters. Do not allow anyone to deplane. Hold him. Tell the captain to prepare for start. Jason Whittaker's regional manager voice was cold as steel. Hold him, Carol whispered. Tears gathering, the whole world is watching. Jason, how can anything be held now? You are embarrassing me. Follow orders or do not bother coming in tomorrow. Carol killed the radio, her hands shaking. She scanned the cabin and found every gaze fixed on Marcus, a look that held both respect and hurt for the first time in 20 years on the job she no longer knew whether she served customers or a blind system. Marcus sat still while his mind whirred like a machine. Each chime and buzz brought fresh data. Patricia texted, "The full Aurora board has convened. The stock is down 17%. Other carriers are watching. You are the media focal point." Marcus looked up at the empty seat. 2A and replied, "Good. The world will witness how one person is denied a seat and how an entire industry is denied forgiveness." Captain Daniel Mercer stepped out again, his face stern but his eyes clear. "Reed, I have orders from headquarters to request that you leave the aircraft." The cabin exploded in protest. A white man in the forward row shouted, "He is not going anywhere." Dr. Naomi Ellis stood and cracked the air with her voice. "If he goes, we all go." Marcus lifted a hand. "Thank you, everyone," then fixed his gaze on Mercer. "Captain, if I step off this airplane, your company will go into free fall. And I do not mean altitude." Mercer did not answer. He only exhaled slowly, torn between orders and conscience. But when he met Marcus's eyes, calm, unresentful, carrying only a faith that what is right will prevail, he knew his choice. "Mr. Reed," Mercer said, clearly, "if you leave this flight, then I leave as well. I will not fly a trip built on a lie." The words split the sky like lightning. Cheers and shouts rolled through the cabin. Carol lifted her head, tears spilling, and whispered, "God, Daniel, you just saved our souls at Aurora headquarters." CEO Elaine Porter stood before the live feed, pale. "Dear God, what did the captain just say?" a PR advisor stammered. "He just said he will leave the company if it does not correct course." Elaine dropped into a chair, eyes hollow. "How far is the stock down?" 22%. Investors are fleeing her desk. Phone rattled with an incoming call. Marcus Reed. Elaine hesitated, then answered. Porter Marcus's voice cut through on speaker, so everyone in the cabin could hear. "I am sitting in the middle of your flight. Hundreds are witnessing the truth. I will be brief if you do not halt all Aurora operations right now for an internal investigation. I will liquidate my entire stake and cancel every NextCore technical contract with Aurora operations, data systems, cybersecurity scheduling. Everything within 2 hours, your airline systems will go dark. A deadly silence. Followed, Elaine fought for a steady tone. "You are blackmailing my company." "No!" Marcus said, "I am saving it. You cannot do that." "You are wrong. I already have." He handed the phone to Patricia. Voice decisive. "Execute protocol. 7B global press release. Aurora Airways under ethical review. Fleet suspension requested." The cabin went still. Jordan whispered. Did he just force an airline to ground its entire fleet? Naomi squeezed his hand. "Yes, and he is doing it for an empty seat." Morales chuckled softly and shook his head. "Not for a seat, for a principle." 30 minutes later, the world shuddered. Hundreds of Aurora Airways flights received the alert. Delay awaiting ethical review. Stunned travelers filled terminals. Reporters flooded departure gates. Special broadcasts broke across networks aboard. Flight 447. Jordan's phone flashed, "Breaking Aurora Airways." temporarily grounds all flights following discrimination, controversy. The cabin erupted. Some stood, some cried, some embraced. Marcus simply sat, eyes on the bright rectangle of sky outside. "We stopped the sky," he said softly. "Now we teach it to fly." The right way, Captain Mercer came to him, removed his cap and set a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You know, I once believed justice could not get off the ground today." "I was wrong," Marcus answered gently. "No, Captain. You only forgot that the sky has a conscience." Meanwhile, Carol Whitman sat with her head bowed. She opened her phone to a flood of abuse racist manager, the face of prejudice. Yet one message cracked her open from her 8-year-old daughter. "Mom, are you the bad lady on TV?" Carol sobbed and typed with trembling fingers. "No, baby, but I have been helping bad people for too long." Marcus rose and stepped into the aisle, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "Today, seat 2. A is not just a place to sit. It is a mirror held up to who we are. If the world can stop for one passenger denied, then perhaps it is time we ask how many other empty seats are still being left behind out there." His words rolled through the cabin and merged with a storm of applause. People clapped not only for Marcus Reed, but for themselves for finally standing and saying no. Outside, the afternoon sun flared against JFK's mirrored glass. Hundreds of Aurora aircraft lay motionless, silent as giants bound by their own guilt across the sky. Other carriers began to post messages. United supports fair skies. Delta commits to equal treatment. The world is watching for the first time in memory. The heavens burned, not with fire, but with light. Marcus returned to his row and looked at seat 2. A still empty, he spoke to himself, voice thick with feeling, "Dad, I did it this time. They cannot force us out of our seat." He pressed a hand to his chest and felt his heartbeat match the cabin's applause. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then the whole aircraft rose and fell together, like the pulse of a single vast heart waking up. As the sun sank over the New York horizon, the massive aircraft bearing the Aurora Airways logo still lay motionless on the ground. No sound of engines, no rolling wheels, only the steady voice of the airport intercom echoing across terminals. All Aurora flights are temporarily suspended until further notice. An entire aviation empire had been stopped by one man, not through force, but through truth. Inside Flight 447, the passenger cabin had become an extraordinary stage of history. Phones continued to live-stream reporters outside, typed at frantic speed. Marcus Reed sat in row 27B, gazing through the window, where sunset painted half his face in crimson light. Patricia's voice came through the speakerphone, quick and urgent. "Mr. Reed, breaking news. The Department of Transportation has launched an investigation. The President has requested an immediate report tonight. They're calling this event the 2A Movement." Marcus closed his eyes. He did not smile, did not gloat, only exhaled slowly. A part of him, the part that had endured silence for years, had finally found its voice. "Patricia," he said softly when they asked, "tell them this isn't a movement. It's an awakening." Captain Daniel Mercer approached, pride and worry flickering in his eyes. "We're at the center of the storm, Mr. Reed. What do you plan to do next?" Marcus stayed silent for a few moments, then stood glancing around the cabin. "I'll do what should have been done long ago. Bring the truth to light." Carol Whitman sat in the corner, eyes red, watching him move forward. She whispered, "It should have been me saying that." Marcus heard her turned, and his tone gentled. "It's never too late to stand on the right side." "Carol," he paused, "as long as you're willing to face it." Carol trembled in her pocket. A small USB drive buzzed as her phone vibrated with a new message from Jason Whittaker. "Delete all emails and data, or I'll make sure you go to prison." Her hand clenched around the device, sweat beading on her palm. But her eyes had changed no longer. Fear, only resolve. She rose and walked straight to Marcus, Mr. Reed. "I have this every message, every email, every recording, 2 years of evidence. If you truly want change, this is the beginning." Marcus looked at her for a long time, until the entire cabin fell silent. He took the USB light glinting across her trembling hand. "Thank you. You just chose to stand tall." Dr. Naomi Ellis couldn't hold back her tears. She lifted her phone and went live. "You're witnessing the spark of justice, not from a politician, but from ordinary people, brave enough to say, 'No.' And now someone who once was wrong is saying, 'I was wrong.' This is how a society changes." Within 3 minutes, her video reached over 1 million views. The world was watching. Flight 447, not as a scandal, but as a symbol of courage. Amid the chaos of media coverage at Aurora headquarters, CEO Elaine Porter was in despair around her PR advisors. Lawyers and investors shouted, "Stock down 28%, the whole system's collapsing. The board's demanding your resignation." "Elaine, we have to control the narrative. We can't let Reed define the story." Elaine slammed the table. "He doesn't want to control the story. He wants to control the truth." She exhaled, eyes hollow, and maybe he deserves to. One advisor asked quietly, "What will you do?" Elaine looked out the window, where the red sunset glowed on the glass. "Call the board, we'll listen to him." Back on the plane, Marcus examined the files on the USB emails appeared on screen. Maintain first-class ambience. Filter guests, inconsistent with brand image. If necessary, use technical reasons. Each line cut deeper than the last, eroding trust. He clicked to audio recordings. Jason Whittaker's voice came out cold. "I don't care who they are. First-class customers should look first class. I don't want to see new money faces in the front cabin." Marcus tightened his fist, but said nothing. He stared through the window, sunset reflections glimmering in his damp eyes. A drop fell, sweat or tears, he couldn't tell. "Captain," he said quietly, voice low. "People need to hear this." Mercer nodded. He switched on the PA system and handed over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice filled the cabin, deep and unwavering. "We are holding in our hands proof of systemic discrimination. Not the mistake of one employee, but a culture maintained, encouraged, and concealed." He raised the USB, the sunset, catching it, making it shimmer like a small blade of light. "This is not data. It is a confession, and today we will end it." Applause erupted. Some cried, others only nodded in disbelief that they were witnessing something real. Carol stepped back, tears streaking her face. Naomi Ellis wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "You just spared millions from going through this again." Carol nodded, voice shaking. "I just don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where her mother once bowed to injustice." In the back rows, Jordan Lee kept streaming, "Do you hear this?" Everyone, an employee, someone who was part of the wrong, just stood up. This is where real justice begins, not when the good act right, but when the guilty choose to make it right. He turned the camera toward Marcus, who sat quietly, eyes closed, the scarlet light bathing his face, bearing the weight of history, yet somehow calm. The cabin fell into solemn silence. Captain Mercer's voice rose. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 447 will not take off until justice receives clearance to fly." Marcus opened his eyes, looked directly into the live stream lens and said, "And justice will never land." Out there, millions of viewers held their breath. The sky was no longer empty. It had become a mirror reflecting human dignity. That night, as city lights bloomed, new hashtags filled the digital sky. Justice takes flight. The To a movement, we stand with Marcus. A silent revolution had taken off, not with the roar of engines, but with the voice of the human spirit. Night fell, laying a quiet silver sheen over JFK. But inside Flight 447, the air was anything but still. It churned like magma, about to burst from a mountain, whose mouth had been forced shut for years. Marcus Reed stood in the aisle before hundreds of eyes phones and cameras and microphones all trained on him, yet he did not see the lenses or hear the noise. He heard only his father's voice in his head, the man who had been thrown out of first class 30 years ago, speaking in the rain. "Son, they will always try to make you smaller. You only lose when you believe they are right today." Marcus was no longer small today. He was as large as the sky in the cockpit. Captain Daniel Mercer lowered the mic and watched the radar glow. He knew that grounding the flight had made him a rebel in the airline's eyes, yet inside he felt a rare peace. He opened the internal channel and addressed everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just received word from the Aurora board. Jason Whittaker, the person behind the seating discrimination decision, has been suspended. Pending investigation." Cheers rolled through the cabin. A few people burst into tears. A middle-aged man whispered, "For the first time, I have seen justice arrive. While it is being tested." Marcus smiled, but his gaze did not stop at relief. It looked farther to what must come next, Captain, he said quietly to Mercer. "I need the system-wide comms," Mercer nodded. "What are you going to do?" "We will not stop at one airplane. If justice only flies here, others will be left behind." The captain was silent for a few seconds, then opened the emergency link that would carry a broadcast from his cabin to the entire Aurora fleet. Paused across the world. "You have the line." Mr. Reed. Marcus stepped forward. A slight hum spread across Aurora aircraft at more than 40 airports worldwide. His voice, low and warm, carried far. "This is Marcus Reed, a passenger on Flight 447. If you can hear me, it means the sky has been halted, not by weather, but by conscience. I am not speaking to turn anyone into an enemy. I am speaking to remind us that respect does not require permission. It is a natural right of being human today. Seat 2. A was left empty tomorrow. It could be your child's chance, your friend's your own taken away, because they do not fit a brand image. If we do not stand today, who will stand tomorrow? No one spoke on the hundreds of aircraft, but within seconds, in each place, passengers began to rise one by one, cabin by cabin. A vast chain reaction rippled through the Aurora system, like a wave of electricity, from Los Angeles to Paris, from Tokyo to Johannesburg. Passengers stood together and raised their phones with a single message. "We stand for Seat 2, A Aurora headquarters, pitched like a ship in a storm." CEO Elaine Porter stood in the boardroom surrounded by panic. A PR advisor shouted, "We are being live-streamed. Globally, every plane is rebroadcasting his words." Another yelled, "Shut down the system. Kill the internal channel. We cannot." The IT engineer said the signal is authorized by a Class A shareholder, which means Mr. Reed's control. Elaine looked up at the main screen where Marcus's face appeared, not with anger, but with a fierce steadiness. She sighed. "We cannot silence a voice. Millions have already heard. We can only listen back on Flight 447. Carol Whitman looked around with tears still falling. She opened her phone to the latest recording, Jason Whittaker's drunken voice sneering. "Those colored customers want first class. I will teach them what social sorting looks like." Carol said nothing. She hit send and forwarded the clip directly to Captain Mercer. A minute later, the audio was played publicly in the cabin and the air detonated. Naomi Ellis shot to her feet. "That is not only discrimination, that is deliberate harm." Morales clenched his fist. "He will be held to account." Marcus stayed composed, though a cold light flashed in his eyes. "No, we will not take revenge. We will punish with light." 10 minutes later, the airline's speakers pushed a global announcement. Aurora Airways announces a comprehensive internal investigation. Jason Whittaker is detained for questioning. The entire executive team is under independent oversight. Passengers around the world applauded in unison. News flashes read, "Aurora Airways, stock down, 31% major shareholder." Marcus Reed directing a full restructuring in the cabin. Marcus stood before everyone. The glow of phones ringed his face like a halo. "Friends," he said, voice tight but clear, "I am not a hero. I am simply a man, exhausted by explaining why I deserve respect." His eyes found Morales and Carol and Naomi and Jordan. "I cannot change the entire world, but I can begin with one seat. And from today, no one will ever again have to ask permission to sit in the place that is theirs." The clapping struck and then grew into waves. Dr. Naomi Ellis wiped her eyes. "God bless you, mister." Reed Morales stood straight, placed his hand on the spot where his badge had been, and murmured, "For my daughter." On the cabin's big screen, the live ticker appeared. "The President of the United States praises the courageous actions of passenger Marcus Reed, calling this a turning point for social fairness. The 2A movement spreads to 17 countries. Hundreds of aviation organizations announce internal policy reviews." Carol gasped softly and covered her mouth. "You have changed the whole world over a single ticket." Marcus looked at her and smiled. "No, Carol. I simply restored the true value of a human being. The world changes itself when we dare to begin." Captain Mercer approached, his voice thick. "Mr. Reed, I have never been prouder to be a pilot than I am today." Marcus laid a hand on his shoulder. "Captain, today you did not only fly an airplane, you flew the conscience of an industry." They looked at each other and said nothing more. In the back, Jordan Lee kept streaming and spoke through a broken voice. "We are witnessing history, not by violence, but by truth, not by power, but by courage outside the window." Other aircraft began lighting up for departure. Again, the sky was no longer quiet. It glittered with 1,000 points like stars, yet no one on Flight 447 rushed to leave. Marcus returned to his row and looked at seat 2. A still empty. "It is time," he said softly, "to put justice in its rightful place." He walked forward and sat down. In seat 2. A soft light fell across his face. The cabin applauded. No one filmed anymore. There was no need. The moment had already been etched into human memory. At Aurora headquarters, Elaine Porter broke down in tears and whispered to the board, "We have just seen something rare, a man who made the whole world lift its head and look inward. Let him lead." And that night, when Flight 447 lifted off after nearly 8 hours of delay, people said it was not just an airplane rising, it was a promise that from now on, no one would be pulled from the seat they deserve. The sky burned bright ahead, and in that sea of clouds, Seat 2A was finally filled not by a passenger, but by justice. 6 months later, every Aurora Airways aircraft carried a small golden plaque engraved with the words, Seat 2A, for everyone who has ever been denied, because they were different. May this seat never be empty because of injustice. From the first-class cabin to the boardroom, the change spread like the ripple of butterfly wings. Aurora was no longer just an airline. It had become a symbol of rebirth through courage. Marcus Reed sat before the Congressional Committee, and behind him sat Carol Whitman, Captain Mercer Morales, Naomi Ellis, and dozens of employees who had once remained silent. On the wall behind them hung a painting of the empty seat, 2A bathed in sunlight, streaming through an airplane window. Marcus's voice was deep and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, a seat is not just a place to sit. It is a declaration of who belongs, who is respected, and who is seen. And when we allow anyone to be forced from their seat, we lower ourselves with them. The room fell silent. An elderly congressman nodded and murmured, "You just reminded me why I entered politics." When the hearing ended outside the Capitol building, thousands lined up to shake Marcus's hand. A little girl about 8 years old handed him a crayon drawing of an airplane with colorful seats and the words written across it, "Everybody's plane." Marcus knelt, looked at her, and said softly, "Thank you, sweetheart. You know it's you and children like you who are the true future of this sky." Then he lifted his gaze to the tall glassed window, where the setting sun gleamed against the waving American flag, its light washing over his face, gentle but resolute. And in that moment, the whole world seemed to hear his father's voice echo from afar, "Son, at last you've made the sky fairer for all of us." Seat 2A was no longer empty. It had become the throne of justice built from the courage of humankind. From the perspective of an expert in ethics and leadership culture, Marcus Reed's journey is not just the story of a seat. It is a declaration for a new era, one where power is no longer measured by status or wealth, but by the ability to make others feel seen. He did not bring down the system through anger. He made it confront itself through truth. The ending of Seat 2A reminds us that justice doesn't reside in punishment, but in awakening, when people have the courage to stand, to say enough, and to believe that even a single act can change the world. If you believe that dignity is the most rightful seat every person deserves to hold, then like this video to share that message and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories of courage, awakening, and faith in what is right. And before you leave, comment the phrase that reflects your belief, a phrase that will make the world pause and think, "Hold your dignity."